talked, but thank you to everybody for taking the time to join us today and for spending time with us previously, learning about the work that we've been up to with a lot of our state partners, and hope that this is a really good way for you to learn more about what some of our state partners are up to in a little bit more detail. So we're joined with by Ken Sauer, the Associate Commissioner of the Indiana Higher Education Commission, and Nick Moore of the Alabama Governor's Office. So thanks to both of you. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentations, but also feel free to put some questions in the chat throughout, and we'll try to address them as well throughout the meeting. But I will go ahead and turn it over to Scott to kick us off.
Great, and I will be very short because really we wanted to highlight both the work in Indiana and in Alabama. So let me just ask, for those of you who, a lot of our state partners on this call and from the state chambers don't know each other, so maybe let's use the chat and just do an introduction of yourself, name and state and organization and role there, just so people kind of have a sense of who's who in the room today. So for those of you who have not formally met, Scott Cheney, I'm the Executive Director at Credential Engine here, and really great to be connected to all of you. I just wanted to give a very quick update on some things that we've been working on since probably our last conversations. I'm going to go back. There we go. Just to give you an idea about what we've been up to and the work we've been doing in response to especially COVID. So we are anticipating a grant coming through from the National Science Foundation. We're doing some work with them in the Midwest. We were asked by them to put in a proposal to respond to COVID in the ways that we could do best. So one of the things that we're doing with that, if it's actually finalized, it's in the recommended stage right now. We're going to be pushing a fair bit of that money into New York State. So I'm forgetting here who is on from New York State. There we go, Amber. We're working with Melinda Mack in New York State to get out to the 120 or so members of her organization, the New York Training and Professionals Association, to have short-term, online, and other kind of quick response credentials and competencies published to the registry that can then be used by workers, used by the governor in the state, be used by employers in the state to know what's accessible, what's available, and how then those kind of credentials link into other credentials and occupations that we can try and be getting better information into workers' hands as part of this recovery. So we're really excited about that opportunity. There'll also be some money going to some allied health educators around the country to put information in, as well as for online providers nationally to try and get information into the registry to help with this recovery. You're going to hear from Alabama in just a second, so I won't take their news, but they have been very cognizant of the need to really double down on making sure that good credential information is available in their tools and their services as part of their response planning. In Washington State, there's been some really interesting and exciting conversations with a couple of state legislators who are really committed to making sure that this is part of their state's response as well. As part of our other work with the National Science Foundation and the work that you'll hear about from Ken in Indiana, we are excited about a new partnership we have with the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, which is a network of 12 Midwestern states, in order to do a more expansive and a more detailed implementation of credential transparency in those 12 states, 6 of whom would be new to us, 6 of them are already working with us, but to make sure that we're getting better information across those states about jobs and employment, about financial aid and other data sets to be linkable to credential and competency data to make this information much more usable and important to workers and students and employers. And then these last 3 things, I just wanted to point out, we're constantly looking for ways to make sure that the work we're doing and the descriptive language is most relevant to the needs of our partners on the ground. So right now, that's really focusing us around making sure that we're building out the ability to better describe credentials and skill or competencies and skills, and how we can link those to jobs and the skill requirements being described by job posters. We're doing more work around pathways and navigation and guidance. And we're actually going to be launching some work in Texas with, we think, the Dallas Community Colleges and North Texas University and the Dallas Independent School Districts to demonstrate the pathways between all of those and the employers in the region. And then this last one I just wanted to flag. We were on a conference call with American Council on Education the other day, who was very conscious of hearing from their member institutions around the country that the ability to facilitate credit transfer for students who have some credits but may not be able to finish where they're at and need to be able to transfer those credits to other institutions is going to be essential during this recovery, because people just need to have flexibility to move to where they need to get to quickly to get a quality credential. So we're just putting on the fast track an effort to make sure that we can better describe and have described in our tools the credit value of various credentials, whether those be from the private sector. So as you may know, ACE has a very large library of credit recommendations that they've put together for private sector companies like McDonald's and Salesforce and Walmart and others, that they can then make recommendations into the education world about what those learning opportunities in private companies should transfer into and be recognized for. They've also done it for the military. So we're working really hard right now to get that entire library of credit recommendations from ACE for both the private sector and the military into the registry. So that can also be a really important part of helping people demonstrate what they already know and get back into work quickly. There's a lot more we've been up to, but like I said, I just wanted to do a very quick update off the top to catch you all up. And I'll turn it back over to Jen to move us along, and then happy to stay on and answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Scott. And just a reminder to please put any additional questions if they come up in the chat. But with that, we'll go ahead and turn over to Nick.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate all of you for giving me an opportunity to join you and share a little bit about what Governor Ivey and Alabama are doing to really implement a strategic plan around non-degree credentials of value. But before I begin on that, I'd like to just spend a few minutes discussing how we have implemented a partnership in real time with Credential Engine to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And that includes the Alabama Workforce Stabilization Program that is a pandemic response incumbent worker, dislocated worker training program that begins by first stress testing and figuring out what are the industry sectors that have been most impacted by COVID-19. And I think every state has been doing some of this work to figure out how can we then take folks who maybe have been working several jobs or have been in an occupation that maybe is not providing the level of family sustaining wage that really could allow them to live up to the full measure of their potential. We're then upskilling people into occupations and industry sectors that are more resilient. And so we're also partnering with the Federal Reserve in this effort to put together, after we first stress tested our economy, then to put together training programs that are delivered virtually and on-site. These are skills-based training programs, and we're partnering with our WIOA boards, our business and industry sector in each of our 7 workforce regions in Alabama to then look at each NAICS code and figure out how do we put a stackable credential sequence together that we can give people progressive wage increases in a short-term and non-credit training program. The fact that we have partnered with Credential Engine over the last 18 months to begin using the transparency descriptor language to register our credentials and then make stackable sequences has given us the opportunity to lay down almost occupational DNA for all of our in-demand occupations. That's allowed us to make some quick adjustments in real time to figure out how has that changed now the fact that nationally we've got 26 million people that have been laid off or furloughed in the last 5 weeks. Obviously, that's affected certain public-facing industries, particularly in Alabama. So those with the most acute effects, we're then allowing folks to move in to these occupations that are more resilient. So if we think about that for a second, for our long-term effort, all states that have an attainment goal, or all states that have an effort to try to help people overcome benefit cliffs, to have an effort to increase your labor force participation rate, this is the time now to help folks that maybe have been struggling working 2 or 3 jobs, have not been able to overcome benefit cliff to make work pay for them. This is our time to reach out to them and get them into a short-term non-credential training program, or something even beyond that. But the most important factor is that these are stackable, that they're transparent, and they're known, and that's where our Credential Engine partnership has been most impactful. So that's going to transition us now into our discussion about the Alabama Committee on Credentialing and Career Pathways has provided the infrastructure and the business partnership to allow us to provide sector strategies, to identify first our in-demand occupations, and then all of the competencies that allow us to make a competency model for each occupation. And then we'll talk about how we've effectuated that with our partnership with Credential Engine, so that we're linking each competency to a credential of value that then demonstrates mastery of that. And then I'll end by talking about how we're developing an integrated learning record that will allow us to return all this data back to the people of Alabama. So we can move on to there's two, and I've really already addressed this, so I'll just touch that the ACCCP was created by statute last year as part of Governor Ivey's Strong Start, Strong Finish P20 strategy to connect our earliest years of learning to the workforce. And we recognize that competency-based learning and competency-based education is an important element to that. But it's hard to begin that work unless you have the taxonomies and the ontologies to first define how we can take learning beyond the credit hour and the time unit of measurement. So the work of the ACCCP is to connect education and the economy by allowing an employer to pick out the competencies and the skills that an individual needs to progress through one occupation or a series of occupations, and then provide a training program, whether that's employer driven, whether that's through a WIOA or a traditional higher education, post-secondary partner, or even for K-12. So then we're identifying in-demand occupations and then creating an annual compendium of valuable credentials that is an iterative process that creates an incentive for credential providers to register and make their credentials transparent, because in order to have an opportunity to get on the annual compendium of valuable credentials, you have to register your credential through our state credential engine. Next slide. So we'll zoom past this very quickly, but this gives you an idea of the members of our committee. It's very important that you have gubernatorial buy-in and the buy-in of your state SHEO, whoever's in charge of your WIOA titles, and certainly your state WIB and your state chief K-12. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're working in sector strategies. Each member of our 16, as we call it, technical advisory committees are members of business and industry. They're supported by members of state agencies and individuals that we call subject matter experts. And that is so that we can translate the work of first looking at our in-demand occupations, competencies, and credentials, and then our state agencies translating that into action by developing competency-based programs, curricula, prior learning assessments, articulation agreements that allow someone to move on a glide path from K-12 to post-secondary, from adult education into post-secondary education, to have multiple points of entry and exit at any point along a career pathway. Next slide. We'll just move past this part. Next slide, please. So what's important is that we developed a 5-star rubric for first determining how we're looking at in-demand occupations in each region. So happy to talk with anybody in further detail on this at a later time, but the 5-star rubric is looking at regional demand and statewide demand. And so we have 5 criteria for looking at demand. We're just looking at aggregate demand in the region statewide. We're ranking those as far as we look at our 16 industry sectors. We use the National Career Cluster model. We also have, through our state workforce agencies, develop a regional in-demand list. But we also have some variability and some opportunity for the regions to show the local labor market dynamics in their region. Next slide. And so here's the rubric, and as you can see, the first criteria of being at least in 70% mean regional wage, and then also the occupations in the top 8 of the 16 clusters, positive annual growth annually and over the decade. And for the fourth criteria, it's either top 40 in-demand list or in the 75th percentile. That factor, why we have some variability there, is because we want to make sure that if an occupation is not part of a stackable sequence, that it provides a family sustaining wage if it's standalone. And there's certainly some apprenticeship programs and truck driving programs and other things we could think of to where there's maybe not a stackable sequence of credentials. It's standalone and family sustaining. And then you also have to have 3 of these 5 to be able to move on to your TAC for approval. So occupations that are on 2 or more regional lists get put on our state list. And I think before we move on to the last thing, I want to mention the 5th criteria of requiring a post-secondary certificate, degree, or credential beyond high school is also a criteria. So we can move on to the next slide. And all of these things, I know I'm moving quickly. I'll send some more things to Emily, who can send out to the group if we want to look more into this. So this should look familiar to most people here. This is just a competency model that USDOL and Urban and other people, Credential Engine, Lumina, have been working on for a long time. But what we have done in Alabama is developed a competency taxonomy and a credential ontology specific to Alabama that moves past ONET. It's a little less wooden. It's more based on what Strata and others have done around skill shapes, so that we can show the dynamic nature of a competency, particularly based on shaping or norming, a competency model around the frequency of that occupation appearing in a region. But we have developed a competency model for each occupation on our in-demand list, and the next step for the ACCCP then is to map our credentials that have been made transparent through our credential registry to one of these competencies, so that our learners and our providers and employers then can get into competency-based hiring. So next slide, please. So this is a little bit about our credential competency taxonomy, and this is based on the Lumina's beta credential framework, and so I won't belabor that. We can move on to the next slide. We also develop pathways and lattices that show the sort of just vertical trajectory of a pathway, but also the fact that there's multiple paths within so if you imagine the nursing pathway, someone can move from CNA to LPN to RN to then even a PhD, but also you might skip one of those phases and go directly from CNA to RN. So it's not always a just direct path, and that's why we're developing pathways and lattices. Next slide, please. This also is something that should look familiar to most people as part of the career pathways project that ETA has developed, but we also are mapping our credential taxonomy and ontology that is using the descriptor language and competencies to a similar pathway here, and that's what powers our multiple points of entry and exit. We're using our community college system and non-degree training providers, including economic incentive program in the state, to standardize all of our training to these models. Next slide. And so this is just an example of how this looks in practice at the advanced manufacturing pathway in the state, where we're combining sort of 3 tropes of work-based learning credentials, and then the particularized education to form, not to go beyond just the DNA of a job, but to show the DNA of a pathway. Next slide, please. And this shows very quickly, just like we have a criteria that helps us identify our in-demand jobs, we have similar criteria for developing the list of credentials of value. So these are similar to what, for example, the National Skills Coalition, we were part of their non-degree credential project that is helping come up with a definition that also takes into account equity and the fact that when we look at the frequency of credentials, associate degrees and non-degree credentials, we need to make sure that we're not selling wooden nickels to people, right? Because when we look at this from an equity perspective, often groups that are most underrepresented or often are the first generation of being able to access higher education are overrepresented in some of these programs. So we need to make sure that they have the mix of career specific and then are modularized so they can articulate into or be able to cash these in for a full degree, 2 or 4 year degree program, because we know, from the work of the Georgetown Center of Education and Workforce, that the right mix of general and occupation specific skills is what ultimately provides somebody the kind of long-term sustainable security in the labor market. So we know that the entry point oftentimes are these non-degree credentials, but we need to make sure that they are transparent and also permeable and translatable and with general skills as well. So next slide, please. We'll just move past this and we can talk further about that. So I'll end by closing with just saying we're also simultaneously working on an integrated learning record called the Alabama College and Career Exploration Tool that allows someone to have a verified resume and a record that follows them from secondary to post-secondary education, and then also just from somebody that's in the workforce, so that they can, when an employer posts a job, we're helping employers to show the value and the reduced HR costs of using a competency-based framework for saying exactly the skills that you need for a job, and then hiring somebody who then on the back end has a verified resume that can show that they've mastered those skills. I know we've got a lot of people from some state and national chamber foundations, and so a lot of the work that the National Chamber Foundation with the Talent Pipeline Management Program, what the White House is doing on ILRs is very similar to what we're doing. So thanks for the opportunity, and happy to follow up with others that would like to chat about any of that.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. And another reminder, feel free to enter any questions in the chat. And with that, we'll go ahead and pass it to Ken and Jillian from Indiana.
Hey, thank you very much. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, just to give you an overview of what we're going to do here, we'll spend some time talking about the data that we've already published and how that was done, talk about some additional data that we want to publish, then move to some strategies to actually how to get learners and employers to access and use the data, and then finally a few closing thoughts. So I'm going to turn to Jillian Schulten, who has done so much great work in publishing all the data that we've published here. And she's going to tell you what we published and how we did it. Jillian.
Thanks, Ken, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Just let me know if you can't. But talking a little bit about the data that we publish, we have been working with Credential Engine for about the past 3 years. And one of my main roles has been to work with our partnering institutions and different organizations to get this information loaded into the registry. So just a little bit about the information that we have in there right now. We have all of the 2- and 4-year public institutions in Indiana, all of their programs at the certificate and degree level. So that's going to be undergraduate as well as graduate programs. We also have 2 private nonprofit institutions on the registry, and we really are hoping that we can get the information from all 30 of them on there very soon. And that information right there, plus some more credentials that we'll talk about here in just a moment, that totals over 3,000 credentials, and we are really trying to add more information to that every week. So for example, right now we're working with high school information. So really trying to keep upping that number and get all of the credentials that we have in Indiana on the registry. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these are the descriptors that we populated for those programs on the registry. We have transfer and articulation agreements in Indiana. We have these great acronyms that are on here, but that's going to be our general education core, and then 2+2 agreements that we have with the public institutions. Those also work at some of the private institutions as well if they choose to participate. We have the program cost information for all of our credentials, so that includes the tuition and fees, and a lot of times that is very specific to that particular program. So we've tried to be very detailed when putting this information on there and make it exactly what that student would be paying for that program if they go into it. We also have added a distance education indicator, so someone that goes on the registry can see if the programs are offered online or on campus, or if it's a blended format. And then part of our state work with our governor's office, there is a Next Level Jobs Workforce Ready grant initiative and related certifications. So those are high demand, high wage programs that students, workers, they're eligible to qualify for some grant money, and we do have all of those listed on the registry, and they are designated with a logo and some other information because they are very high priority to us. And finally, our work actually began working on military training and trying to get that information in the registry. So we do have some bridge programs in there with a couple of our institutions. And then next slide, please. So just a few more pieces of information that we have connected to these credentials. We have been able to add some accreditation data to these credentials. So ABET, that works with engineering programs. We've also done a lot of work with health programs, in particular with nursing. So we have that linkage to a lot of these accreditors, and we are also hoping to really add that information and get that information loaded for every credential we have on the registry that has an accreditor. We have some licensure data on there as well for nursing, and we're working with Credential Engine to hopefully get some pass rate data on there very soon. And then a big thing, like they were talking about with the Alabama work, the competencies are really key to our focus here in Indiana. And we have the Ivy Tech associate degree competencies in there, and that's our statewide community college system. So all of those associate degrees are listed in there. And then we're hoping to get the certificate program competencies in there very, very soon as well. But this image that's on here, you can see that's a screenshot from our widget that Credential Engine helped us to get on one of our websites, that's transferin.net. So that is a great website that we have for all students and folks in Indiana that would like to go and learn more about the transfer initiatives. They can go and actually see all of this information that we have in the registry, particularly for Indiana. It's a little bit easier to search it. It's filtered just for our state. And then next slide, please. And this is the last slide that I'll cover, but we wanted to talk just really quickly about what we did in our approach to go about getting this information on the registry. I work at the Commission for Higher Education, and Ken, who you'll hear from in just a moment, he has been at the commission for, I think it's been 34 years. So he has a lot of great connections, a lot of partnerships have already been created through his work in the state. But what we work to do is just that initial outreach to folks that we had already worked with, to our higher education institutions, and then branch out from there. But we were able to set up meetings with these organizations, with the institutions, and demonstrate what their information would look like in the registry. A lot of times when we just talk about this information, it was hard for some people to really visualize what their info would look like in there and why is this going to be important to me. So we had these meetings where we were able to demonstrate what that would look like and help them to visualize. We also have an academic program inventory at the commission, and that is a big database system that houses information about all of the programs that we offer in Indiana at the public institutions, as well as the private and for-profit. So what we've done is we've looked at that information for these public institutions, and we've put that information into these bulk upload spreadsheets that Credential Engine has available. And then we were able to send that information to the institution or organization and help them look at that information and add in those minimum elements that are required to get the information on the Credential Engine registry. So that was a lot easier for them because they didn't have to deal with necessarily all the technical aspects of it. Since we technically own that data, we were able to help them through that process and then just verify it with them, but do a lot of that back end work. And then one other thing we did for them, we helped them to upload and approve it, again, because sometimes with the technology, it was just a little bit easier, since I'm working on that every single day, to help them through that until they were able to do that on their own. So I'll toss it back to Ken.
Okay. Well, Jillian has talked about all the data that we've already published. That we published a lot, but we have a lot more that we want to publish. So while we have the competencies for all of the associate degrees, we want them also to be published for the certificates, as well as every degree and certificate at every level in our public system as well. We'd like to also get the private institutions on as well. We have worked with our Department of Workforce Development to generate a lot of return on investment data, more specifically earnings of graduates of particular programs 1, 5, and 10 years after graduation. I should say a part of what we're about here is to provide information that students, prospective students, learners can look at as they make choices about what programs to pursue. Along the same lines, while we want to connect programs that will prepare people to particular licenses, we also want to publish licensure pass rate data, again, which is an indicator of quality and which can give prospective students some information upon which to select a particular program to pursue. The eligible training provider list, which the U.S. Department of Labor requires, is another thing that we want to publish on the registry. We're working closely with our Department of Workforce Development to do that. While our community college system will have a lot of programs on that ETPL, we also want to include non-traditional providers. So, for example, we have worked with Goodwill Industries to publish the programs that they make available and which are included on the ETPL. Also, coding boot camps and other kinds of non-traditional providers. Another important thrust of what we're doing here regarding additional data to publish is to connect with our high school, secondary sector. So we want to publish all of the career and technical education programs that are available at our career centers around the state. In addition, we have some non-CTE pathways available to high school students as well. We have actually a very large and well-developed post-secondary dual credit system in our state. So many high schools have sufficient general education coursework available to them through post-secondary partners that the students can actually complete the 30 semester hour general education core, which is transferable throughout the public sector while they're still in high school. So we want to get all of those identified as well. And then finally, another important piece of information that we want to get published on the registry is apprenticeships, not only the adult apprenticeships, but also emerging youth apprenticeships that would be available to high school students as well. Next slide. So now I'd like to spend a little time talking about how all of this data that has already been published and that will be published in the coming months can be used. So we've got several different strategies about how to get the data to be used. The first is to work with existing career exploration software vendors to have them point to the registry for information about education and training programs available in Indiana. We actually have a state license with one of those vendors, Cooter, the Career Explorer software, and we are working with them to point to the registry for education and training data. That contract will be up for renewal. So the state will be issuing an RFP, and we will include in the RFP a requirement that vendors point to the registry for information about education and training programs available in Indiana. In addition, there are going to be programs, career exploration software programs that would be available in other places. High schools have licensed software that they like. They don't have to use the state-supported software, and we'd like to reach out to those vendors as well so that we can get them to point to the data in the registry as well. Next slide, please. So another strategy is to work with emerging applications that are being developed, which would link job and education and training data together. So a good example is the Google Pathways work. Google is developing some programs that will identify in-demand, high-wage jobs and to link those to education and training programs that prepare someone to obtain those jobs. So Google came to the commission and we have partnered with them over probably the past 6 to 12 months now. And the Google Pathways for Indiana was published about a couple of months ago, and that points the data for the education and training programs that would be available through our community college sector is available to users of Google Pathways. Some other software vendors that we're working with are Bendable. Actually, that's one that is connected to a regional partnership, education and economic development partnership in the South Bend, Elkhart area. So we have spent a lot of time in that part of the state working with employers and training providers, colleges and universities, other community leaders to see how the credential registry could be of use to an existing ongoing regional partnership. And out of that came a potential linkage to this Bendable software, which again will help people to find in-demand jobs and through education and training programs. MC, which provides a lot of labor market data to many, many states throughout the country, also provides data to Indiana, and they are developing a career coach software, and we're working closely with them to incorporate the registry's data into their database. Finally, Next Level Jobs, that's one of the governor's key initiatives. It focuses on short-term certificates, both credit and non-credit bearing, and this is a key part of Indiana's response to the COVID-19 and recovery. So all of those next level jobs are also in the registry. Next slide, please. And then finally, we want to try to integrate the credential registry with all kinds of state initiatives. So we have our state strategic workforce plan, which is required by the U.S. Department of Labor. The Commissioner Lubbers chairs the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, which put together that state strategic workforce plan. That includes agency heads of all state agencies that in one way or another impact Indiana's workforce, and Credential Engine is a part of that workforce plan. We're also working closely with the Department of Education to, again, publish our dual credit and early college and CTE Career Center programs. I'm going to skip down to the last point there, digital credentials. Indiana has a 15-year-old e-transcript initiative, and that is focusing on credentials, transcripts that can be sent from not only high schools to college and college to colleges, but we also want to work on how digital credentials could be sent to employers to more quickly communicate what competencies a student has mastered and how those could quickly be discerned by the HR department as they review applications. A key link to these digital credentials will be to the credential registry, so that through this digital credential, the recipient of this digital credential will be able to access all of the information about the credentials that the student has earned, who provided those credentials, and who ascribes value to those credentials as well. Next slide, please. Scott has already mentioned the National Science Foundation grant, so I won't spend too much time on this. The Phase 1 grant focused entirely on Indiana, and the Phase 2 grant, as Scott mentioned, will include a partnership with the 12-state Midwestern Higher Education Compact. We think this is a good way not only to share work and best practices, but simply just to reinforce each other's efforts in this area. Best practices are always a great way for seeing how individual states can move ahead with implementing a Credential Engine, and more importantly, in making the education and work ecosystem much more transparent. I should also mention we have a Skillful Indiana initiative underway. That's a Skillful initiative that's tied to the Markle Foundation, is available in many states, and we're working closely in partnership with that initiative. We also have a Comprehensive Learner of Record initiative, which is tied to our e-transcript program, so that we can get beyond the traditional transcript to get to a way in which students can identify all of the competencies and experiences, work, especially those that are work-related experiences that they have had as they earn their credential in college or some other non-traditional provider. Next slide, please. Okay. So I think COVID-19 really will accelerate a trend which is very much toward a digitally based learn and work ecosystem, and the recovery of the economy that was caused by the COVID-19 disruption, I think, will require a quick response. Of course, we hope that the economies of the individual states and the nation as a whole will recover very quickly, but however long it takes, whatever the sequencing is in terms of industries as they try to recover, this will require a rapid response, and that can be facilitated by digital, transparent credentials, and that's all what Credential Engine and the Credential Registry is about. You know, Jillian mentioned I've been with the Commission for Higher Education here in Indiana for a long time, although I think I've probably had 10 different careers in this role in this state agency. And I think I identify my latest career, if you will, in addition to all of the standard stuff that state agencies of higher education do, like developing transfer agreements and figuring out what what institutions can offer doctoral programs and making budget recommendations and running student financial aid programs. In addition to all of that stuff, I think an emerging important role for state agencies of higher education is to facilitate a learn and work marketplace with reliable information, especially about competencies that are sought by employers, cultivated by education and training providers, and mastered by individual learners. Marketplaces don't work unless they're based on good, sound, accessible information. And that's what Credential Registry does. That's what the Credential Engine initiative is all about. And then finally, the last slide. Yes.
Ken, I know you have one more slide. I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure there's some really good questions in the chat. So I know you just have one more slide, so if you can just do it real quick, and then we can.
I will indeed.
Move on to Q&A.
This simply sums up where we want to be, which is to tie much more closely educators to industry and to make sure that the competencies that our learners are picking up through their certificate and degree programs can be communicated to industry, and that this dialogue between educators and employers will stress the competencies that are needed. I'm done.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, Ken. I am going to go ahead and stop my screen share so that we can all see each other again. And I will go ahead and start by reading some of the questions that we had in the chat. So, let's see. Amber had a question: how large is Indiana's public university system?
It's pretty large, depending on whether you include non-credit students or not. But in any case, our 2-year and 4-year sector together has enrolled somewhere approaching 400,000 students per year.
And Ken, how many Ivy Tech campuses are there?
Well, there are 19 main campuses. I should say Ivy Tech is our statewide community college system. Actually, it's the only statewide system in the country that is accredited as a single institution. So they cover basically the entire state with 19 main campuses and many centers. And
then 4-year institutions?
We have 5 4-year institutions, 2 of which are multi-campus systems. So Indiana University, in addition to the main campus in Bloomington and Indianapolis, has 5 regional campuses, and Purdue University has, in addition to its main campus in West Lafayette, has 2 other campuses in the northern part of the state.
Great. And Amber, if you have any follow-ups to that, you can either pop off mute or put them in the chat. So.
I see a question from Brian. How is the adoption of IRCs into 4-year programs in Indiana public HEs? Also, how has this work increased IRC adoption in 4-year programs?
And I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Jen?
So Brian asked, how is the adoption of IRCs into 4-year programs? I'm assuming, and Brian, feel free to come off mute if you want to elaborate. So
industry recognized credentials.
Yes. And how has the work increased the adoption into 4-year programs?
Well, we are all about tying together stackable credentials, and we have identified 19 single articulation pathways. These are pathways that work between 2- and 4-year institutions. So if you complete an associate degree in a particular area, that transfers to any public campus that is offering a related baccalaureate degree. We also have what we call our core transfer library, individual courses that transfer throughout our public sector, as well as our state gen ed core. We try to, we have all of our public campuses participating in a comprehensive learner record initiative. which is aimed at capturing competencies that can be captured in an individual learner record that can be digitally transmitted to a receiving institution, or in fact to an employer as well. And we haven't fully achieved that goal, but we're working pretty hard on it. Did I get it? Did I answer that question?
So yeah, Ken, pretty good there. The one thing that we're trying to push in Missouri, for example, is that industry recognized credentials are more embedded in a four-year degree program. So, I mean, I think it was said by either you or by the speaker from Alabama, the reality is that a four-year degree program is not going to be in the sights of many of the folks that are out of work and looking for work in the next, 3 to 18 months, really. So how are four-year degree programs going to make themselves more relevant by embedding industry recognized credentials or other credentials other than just the four-year degree diploma?
Right. Brian, good question, and you're right. I think so much of the emphasis in the short term is going to be on the shorter term credentials and those offered by the two-year sector. But we're really in this for the long game, and people who are graduating with degrees now are going to be in, how many, 5 to 10 more careers throughout their work life, and increasingly they will need to upskill in particular areas. So they may have some great competencies that they have mastered as a result of going through a four-year program, but because of technology changes, because of changes to the global economy, there's going to be a need to be more flexible and to pick up new skills that will be valuable. So I think we're seeing many of our four-year institutions looking at short-term industry and professional association recognized credentials, certifications, as ways to make sure that a baccalaureate holder's degree and their skill set can stay current, so they don't have to go back and completely earn an entirely new degree. They can keep current by picking up an industry certification.
I might see if Nick, you want to respond to that as well, and how you're thinking about embedding industry certifications and other credentials in some of the more traditional programs.
Sure, thanks. I think the statement was made earlier that the trend towards combining short-term and non-credit programs and competency-based learning with traditional 2- and 4-year degrees was a trend that we saw pre-COVID. It's only accelerating now. So as we get more virtually delivered programs, as we are connecting employers with the direct skills they're needing in the labor market with the means of providing that, and getting past the time and credit hour as a substitute for learning or knowledge, then I think what higher ed is going to do is, as we see that it's not just demographic trends that may be the issues that are at hand about declining enrollment and other issues that are coming up, but it's actually more about demand and sometimes the type of programs that are available. So I think this is going to be an organic transition in post-secondary education and higher education to modularize traditional degrees, decouple the traditional degree, and be able to allow somebody to earn progressive wage increases along a career pathway rather than just having to wait for a terminal degree. So I think it's a natural, good thing we should all be excited about, and those that embrace it and jump on that bandwagon sooner are going to reap the rewards. Those that wait and are going to get left behind.
That's great. And I'm conscious of time and of our guests needing to jump. I see one other question in here. How long was it taking to get public university information into the registry? And I'd love to have both Ken and or actually probably Jillian and Nick give quick responses. I will say that, you know, since the time that Ken and Jillian started this 3 years ago, we've developed an enormous improvement in publishing functionality. So, you know, we've got bulk upload tools that allow institutions in whole states. Ohio State or the state of Ohio has been publishing a lot of data very quickly through APIs and bulk uploads, and those were tools that we didn't have fully in place when Jillian was starting this work way back when. And I think that's going to, you know, help Nick and Alabama as well by working through some of our API tools. So it may be a slightly different answer because it took Indiana quite a long time just because we weren't fully up to speed. But let me give the two of you a quick moment to respond.
Well, I guess I can start from the perspective end on that, because what we are doing is we spent the last 6 months setting up the infrastructure so that our state longitudinal data system and Credential Engine are linked, so that we're not doing manual data entry, and we're linking the legal and procedural process of a provider really needing to register their credential in order for that to have any representation on our list of valuable credentials. So I think linking together the legal, basically codifying this process and making it clear to providers that this is the route you have to take in order to receive preference by any education and training providers, and then making it an API and an automated algorithmic process for matching the competency to the credential, the intensity of the competency. If we're asking staff at you know, SHIOs and people like that to do manual data entry on this, we're you know, really not ever going to fully live out the vision of why we're doing this. So I'll stop there.
Well, let me quickly say, when we started, there was no playbook. There is a playbook now as far as publishing new information goes. But there is another challenge, and Scott and his team are fully aware of this, and we're trying to work on this as well, which is how do you maintain the currency of all the data that's in there? And that's an important challenge that has to be met, but we're all aware of that, and we're all working on that. And you know, I'm sure just as a solution has been developed to more efficiently publish initial data, that will also develop a very efficient way of keeping it current.
And I'll just help us close out this really informative hour of conversation. And thank you, Nick, and thank you, Ken, to say that, you know, part of the currency challenge is solved by having the APIs in place, so that as data in the source resources in Alabama is updated, it's automatically being updated in the registry, so that we can make sure that we're just reflecting the currency of their own state data. And that's a mechanism we're putting in place with Kansas and others who are using the API to ensure that there is that real-time flow of information. So as Ken said, we continue to develop our playbook and develop our technologies, and are really excited about the partnerships we have working with us, where we're going, and really appreciate everyone's time today. So with that, I know we've filled a very good hour. Appreciate everyone's time. Ken and Nick, we'll let you get back to your great work in the States, and we'll look forward to talking to everyone soon.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much,
everybody.
Take care.
Everyone. Bye.